During a silent dawn, a sleepless millionaire catches the maid's daughter washing dishes with wounded hands. Realizing she was hiding something serious, he began a silent investigation. He then discovered a brilliant young woman sacrificing her own life to save her ailing mother. Before listening to this incredible account, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more touching stories. The dawn weighed upon the mansion like a thick, suffocating blanket. Victor Alliance walked through the silent corridors of the second floor, unable to find the sleep that had eluded him for years. His steps echoed on the cold marble, a solitary sound that seemed to amplify the emptiness of that enormous house. At 62, he had built a financial empire that few could even imagine, but success had brought with it a solitude that no money could fill. It was 3:40 in the morning when he descended the main stairs, guided more by habit than by any specific goal. Perhaps a glass of water, perhaps just another aimless walk. But as he approached the kitchen, Victor heard a sound that should not have been there at that hour, the clinking of dishes being washed, accompanied by a low, tired sigh. He pushed the kitchen door open slowly and found a scene that made him stop in his tracks. A young girl, no more than 17, stood with her back to him, bent over the sink full of plates and pans. Her narrow shoulders were bowed under an invisible weight, and her hands, which Victor could see even from a distance, were red and swollen. Helen, the daughter of Rose, the housekeeper, who had worked for him for over 15 years. The girl had not noticed him yet. She continued washing the dishes with mechanical, slow movements, as if each plate required immense effort. Victor noticed the makeshift bandages on her fingers, the dark circles, under her eyes the tense posture of someone about to collapse. He cleared his throat softly. Helen spun around with a start, almost dropping the plate she was holding. Her wide eyes revealed a mixture of surprise and something deeper, fear, perhaps, or shame. "Mr. Alliance," she said, her voice faltering, "I didn't know you were awake. I'm sorry, I'll finish up here and leave." Victor raised a hand in a placating gesture. Slowly, he walked to the central island of the kitchen and pulled out a stool, sitting in a way that wouldn't seem intimidating. "Helen, it's almost 4 in the morning. What are you doing here?" The girl lowered her eyes, turning back to the sink. "My mother isn't feeling well. She has the flu, so I came to help with her work. I didn't want you to be without." Victor observed her injured hands, the poorly made bandages, the trembling fingers holding the sponge. This wasn't just help. There was something more in the tension of those shoulders, in the way she avoided his gaze. "Your hands are hurt," he said softly. "It's nothing, sir. Just some small cuts. It happens." "From washing dishes?" Helen didn't respond. She continued scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary, as if she could erase the conversation along with the dirt. Victor felt that familiar sensation, the one that had accompanied him since the days he built his empire from scratch. It was the ability to read people, to notice when something wasn't right, when a story didn't add up. And the story of that 17-year-old girl washing dishes at 4 in the morning with injured hands definitely didn't add up. "Shouldn't you be home resting for school?" "Holidays," she replied too quickly. "In October." The silence that followed was more revealing than any words. Helen stopped washing the plate, her fingers squeezing the sponge until foam seeped between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was even lower. "I have to go, Mr. Alliance. Thank you for your concern, but everything is fine." She rinsed her hands quickly, grabbed a worn bag from a corner and walked toward the service door. Victor watched her leave, noticing how she limped slightly, as if her feet hurt. When the door closed behind her, Victor remained seated in the silent kitchen, looking at the now clean, full sink of dishes. The fluorescent light from the ceiling cast harsh shadows on the room, and he found himself thinking of all the nights he had passed through that kitchen without noticing anything beyond his own emptiness. But now he had noticed, and something about that perception wouldn't leave him in peace. Victor stood up and walked to the window overlooking the side garden. From there, he could see Helen passing through the property gate, walking slowly under the streetlights. She didn't take a taxi. She didn't call a car. She simply began to walk down the deserted avenue, her tired steps disappearing into the darkness. He returned to his room, but didn't try to sleep. He sat in the armchair by the window and stayed there, watching the city slowly awaken as the sky began to lighten. And in his mind, a single question repeated endlessly. What was that girl hiding? At 8 in the morning, Victor was in his private office within the mansion. He had called Peter, his personal assistant and trusted man for almost 20 years. Peter was discreet, efficient, and above all, loyal. If there was anyone Victor could trust to investigate something delicate, it was him. "Peter, I need you to do something for me," Victor said when the assistant arrived, carrying his leather briefcase and a double espresso. "And I need absolute discretion." Peter nodded, sitting in the chair opposite the mahogany desk. "Of course, Mr. Alliance. What is it about?" "I want information about Rose's daughter, Helen. How old is she? Where does she study? How is she doing in school?" Peter raised his eyebrows, surprised, but didn't question. Rose had worked in the house for a long time, and he knew Victor had genuine respect for her. "I'll check, sir. Anything specific you'd like to know?" "Everything. I want to know everything about that girl, but without her or her mother knowing I'm investigating. This is important, Peter. No alarming anyone." "Understood. How much time do I have?" "By the end of the day, and use your contacts at the city council if necessary." Peter made a quick note and left, leaving Victor alone again. He spun his chair to face the panoramic window that offered a privileged view of London. The city stretched before him like a living, pulsating organism, indifferent to the individual dramas unfolding in its millions of homes. Victor thought of Rose. She was a reserved woman, always polite, always efficient in her work. He knew little about her personal life, only that she was a widow raising her daughter alone. Rose never asked for anything, never complained, and always performed her tasks with a silent dignity that he respected. But now he wondered, how many other things did he not know? How many signs had he ignored by being so absorbed in his own world? The day passed slowly. Victor tried to focus on meetings and financial reports, but his mind constantly wandered back to that scene in the kitchen. Helen's injured hands, her dark, exhausted eyes, the way she had lied about school holidays. At 6 in the evening, Peter returned. His expression was serious when he entered the office, and Victor immediately knew the news wasn't good. "Mr. Alliance," Peter began, sitting down again, "I got some information about Helen." "And?" Peter opened his briefcase and took out some papers. "Helen is 17. Until 3 weeks ago, she was a student at St. Peter's State College, one of the best public schools in London. And she wasn't just an ordinary student, sir. She was exceptional." Victor leaned forward. "Continue." "Helen was nationally recognized 2 years ago as one of the top 10 students in the country in mathematics and science. She won Olympiads, competitions, had a full scholarship guaranteed at the National University engineering course. Teachers spoke of her as a prodigy. She had everything ahead of her." "Had?" Peter paused, his fingers tightening on the papers. 3 weeks ago, she dropped out of school. She simply stopped showing up. She didn't provide a justification, didn't notify anyone. The coordination tried to contact her, but they never managed to speak with her or her mother. She was officially registered. As a school dropout, she lost her university scholarship. She lost everything. Victor felt something tighten in his chest. Why? What was the reason? "No one knows for sure. The school is confused. The teachers are worried. But there's something else, sir." "What?" Peter hesitated before continuing. "I made some discreet calls. I spoke with a friend who works at the city hospital. Rose, Helen's mother, was diagnosed about a month ago with systemic lupus erythematosus. It's a serious autoimmune disease, sir, debilitating. And the treatment is expensive, very expensive." Victor closed his eyes. The pieces began to fit together, forming an image he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. "Continue. Rose's health plan is the basic one, provided by your company for domestic employees. It covers consultations and emergencies, but not prolonged treatments for autoimmune diseases. The medication she needs cost thousands a month, and she has no way to pay." "And Helen?" Peter looked directly at Victor. "Helen dropped out of school to take over her mother's work. She comes here every night, works unpaid, just to keep the health plan active in the hope of getting some coverage. During the day, she works as a waitress at a restaurant in the city center, double shift, from 11 in the morning to 11 at night. Victor felt anger grow within him. A 17-year-old girl, working almost 12 hours a day, giving up her future, her education, her dreams, just to try to save her mother. "There's more, sir," Peter said softly. "How can there be more?" Peter sighed. "I did a basic financial check. Rose and Helen are 3 months behind on rent. They received an eviction notice. They have 30 days to vacate the apartment." The silence that followed was heavy. Victor stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the city began to turn on its nightlights, thousands of small, bright spots against the darkening sky. How many other Helens were out there? How many lives destroyed by circumstances that could be changed with a single gesture? How many times had he passed by people like this without even noticing? "Mr. Alliance?" Peter asked softly. Victor turned around. "I want you to find out where she works. The name of the restaurant, the address, everything. And I want to know more about Rose's medical situation. What treatments she needs, how much they cost, what the options are. Do you intend to help?" Victor looked at his assistant. "I don't know yet, but I need to understand the situation completely before making any decision." Peter nodded and stood to leave. "Victor?" "Yes?" "It's a good deed, sir. To help." Victor didn't answer. When he was alone again, he sat back down. But this time he couldn't concentrate on anything. His mind was in another kitchen, in another dawn, on a pair of injured hands he couldn't forget. He didn't know yet, but that night would change everything. For him, for Helen, and for everyone involved. Because sometimes a single moment of perception is all that separates an ordinary life from an extraordinary destiny. And Victor Alliance was about to discover that some encounters are not coincidences. They are debts from the past collecting their price in the present. They are invisible threads connecting lives across time, just waiting for someone to pull them to reveal the complete tapestry. But that he would only discover later. For now, all he knew was that a 17-year-old girl was destroying her own life to save someone she loved. And that he, a man who had everything except peace, might be able to do something about it. The question was just to find out what, and how to do it without destroying the pride and dignity of the two women in the process. Because, as Victor would soon learn, sometimes the hardest part of helping is not finding the resources, but finding the right way to offer them without turning gratitude into humiliation. And that was a lesson he still needed to learn. The next morning, Victor woke with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't slept much, perhaps 2 hours, at most, but he didn't feel tired. There was something different pulsing in his veins. Purpose, perhaps, or just the need to do something that truly mattered. Peter arrived at 9 sharp, as always, carrying more information. The restaurant where Helen works is called Capital Flavors. It's in the city center near the bus terminal. It's a busy, popular place, but not exactly known for treating its employees well. Victor nodded. "I need to go there." "Sir?" "I need to see it with my own eyes, see how she is, the environment, everything. But I can't just show up and be recognized. I need to be discreet." Peter thought for a moment. "I can arrange something, perhaps a simple disguise, different glasses, casual clothes. You don't usually frequent places like that, so the chances of being recognized are small." "Do it." 2 hours later, Victor was unrecognizable. He wore simple jeans, a casual shirt, and dark glasses. Peter had even suggested a cap, but Victor drew the line there. He had his dignity after all. Capital Flavors was exactly as Peter had described. A large, always crowded restaurant, with cramped tables and a constant movement of customers. The smell of frying food permeated the air, mixed with loud voices and the clinking of cutlery against plates. Victor chose a table at the back, from where he had a privileged view of the dining area. And then he saw her. Helen was on the other side of the restaurant, carrying a heavy tray with plates and glasses. She wore a worn uniform too big for her thin body, and her hair was tied in a messy ponytail. But what caught Victor's attention most were her eyes. Even from a distance, he could see the deep exhaustion, the way she moved mechanically, from table to table, like an automaton fulfilling a programmed function. He watched her for almost an hour. He saw how she served each customer with a mechanical courtesy, how she never stopped for a second, how her feet clearly hurt with every step. And he saw something else. A middle-aged man whom Victor later discovered to be Alan, the restaurant manager, followed Helen with his eyes constantly. There was something predatory in his gaze, something that made Victor's stomach churn. And when Helen accidentally dropped a glass that shattered on the floor, Alan went to her quickly. Victor couldn't hear what was said, but he saw the way Alan pointed his finger at Helen's face, how he spoke to her in an aggressive tone while other employees and customers watched. He saw how Helen lowered her head, ashamed, and began to pick up the glass shards with her bare hands. He saw when she cut her finger and didn't even stop, just wrapped a napkin around the cut and continued working. It was at that moment that something within Victor broke. It wasn't just pity, it was anger. Anger at that man, at that system, at that world that allowed a brilliant girl to be treated like disposable trash. He stood up, about to intervene, but something stopped him. If he intervened now, it would cause a scene, and a scene could cost Helen her job. It could make everything worse. So Victor did the hardest thing he could do. He sat down again and just watched, but he etched every detail of that humiliation into his memory, and he promised himself that it wouldn't stay that way. When he finally left the restaurant, Victor felt as if he had aged 10 years in an hour. Peter was waiting for him in the car, and from his boss's expression he knew something was wrong. "It was worse than I imagined," Victor said as the car began to move. "Much worse." "What did you see?" Victor told him everything. The humiliation, the abusive manager, the working conditions, the injuries. Peter listened in silence, his jaw growing tighter and tighter. "Mr. Alliance, there's something else I found out," Peter said when Victor finished, "about the restaurant manager. Alan, he has a history of labor irregularities, underage employees without proper registration, excessive hours, moral harassment. He was never formally reported because people are afraid of losing their jobs." Victor closed his eyes. "So she's working illegally?" "Technically, yes, she's 17. She could work with proper authorization, but not the hours she does. And Alan knows that. He uses it as leverage against her. He's blackmailing a teenager." "Essentially, yes." The car drove through the busy streets of London, but Victor saw nothing. His mind was busy processing information, building a plan. He didn't know yet how he would help, but he knew he had to be smart. Haste could ruin everything. "Peter, I need you to find out where Rose and Helen live, the full address, and I need you to get access to Rose's medical records with legal authorization, of course. I want to know exactly what treatment she needs and how much they cost. And what about the restaurant? We'll deal with that soon, but first I need to fully understand their financial situation." "Understood." That night, Victor did something he hadn't done in decades. He left the house alone, without a driver, without security guards, and drove to a modest neighborhood in the East End of London. The address Peter had obtained led him to an old apartment building with peeling walls and narrow staircases. He parked on the street and watched the building for a few minutes. It was on the 3rd floor, apartment 305. A light was on in the window, and through the thin curtains, Victor could see shadows moving. He didn't know why he was there. Perhaps he needed to see how they lived. Perhaps he needed to fully understand the dimension of their struggle before deciding how to act. Or perhaps, Victor admitted to himself, he just needed to feel that he was doing something. That's when he saw Helen leave the building. She was carrying a trash bag and walking slowly to the dumpster on the corner. Even in the partial darkness of the dimly lit street, Victor could see how she moved with difficulty, how each step seemed to require conscious effort. He hunched down in the car seat, hoping she wouldn't see him. Helen threw out the trash and stood there for a moment, just looking up at the night sky. There was something infinitely sad in that posture, a loneliness that Victor recognized because it was the same one he carried. Then she went back into the building, disappearing into the dark interior. Victor waited a few more minutes before making an impulsive decision. He got out of the car and walked to the building. There was no doorman, no security. He climbed the stairs silently to the third floor. Apartment 305 was at the end of the corridor. The door was old, the paint peeling. Victor could hear voices inside. Helen and Rose talking softly. He couldn't make out the words, but there was something in the tone that was both intimate and desperate. He was about to leave when he noticed something. A half-open drawer in a small cabinet in the hallway near the apartment door. The cabinet was obviously broken. The door didn't close properly, and the drawer was jammed, half out of place. Victor looked around. The hallway was empty. Without thinking much, he approached the cabinet and gently pulled the drawer. It was full of papers, some already yellowed with age. He shouldn't be rummaging there. He knew that, but something stronger than reason propelled him. There were letters, many letters. Some were overdue bills with red notices highlighting overdue amounts. Water, electricity, gas, all several months behind. There were also collection notices, some already with threats of legal action. And at the bottom of the drawer, Victor found what he feared most, an eviction notice. The official paper, with the court seal, stating that Rose and Helen had exactly 23 days to vacate the property. The deadline was already approaching. Victor quickly photographed the document with his phone, then put everything back as it was and closed the drawer as much as it allowed. His heart was pounding. He was invading their privacy, violating their trust, even if with good intentions. But now he knew. He knew how close they were to losing everything. He knew time was running out. He hurried down the stairs and returned to his car. All the way back to his mansion, Victor couldn't stop thinking about those letters, that jammed drawer, that eviction notice. When he finally got home, it was past midnight. The mansion was silent and empty as always, but this time the emptiness seemed even more oppressive. Victor went to his office and turned on his computer. He spent the next 3 hours researching systemic lupus erythematosus, treatments, costs, prognoses. What he discovered was both encouraging and frightening. With proper treatment, Rose could lead a relatively normal life. But without treatment, the disease was progressive and debilitating, and the necessary medications cost a fortune. More than Rose or Helen could dream of paying with their minimum wages. Victor did the calculations. He added up the medical costs, the overdue debts, the rent, the basic living costs. The total amount was high. For them, impossible. For him, equivalent to what he spent on a weekend, without even thinking. But he knew it wasn't just a matter of money. Rose had pride. Helen had dignity. They wouldn't accept charity. They wouldn't accept being seen as objects of pity. Victor needed to find a way to help that respected that. And then, as he leafed through the papers and reports scattered on his desk, Victor found something he had forgotten. An old folder, stored in a drawer he rarely opened. It was a folder about his brother, Mark. Mark Alliance had been 8 years older than Victor, a brilliant, charismatic man who had chosen a military career while Victor built his financial empire. Mark had served with distinction for over 20 years until the inevitable happened. The war, the combat, and Victor never talked about it. The pain was old, but still throbbed when touched. His mother never recovered from the loss. She lived the last 10 years of her life as a shadow, sustained only by a deep sadness and a collection of letters she guarded like treasures. Letters. Victor stopped suddenly. Those letters. His mother mentioned them frequently before she passed. She said they had been written by Mark's commanding officer, a man she never met personally, but whose words had been the only thing that kept her alive in those dark days. Where would those letters be now? Victor had never bothered to look. After his mother's passing, he had stored all her belongings in boxes, stored in the mansion's attic. Boxes he never had the courage to open. But now, for some reason he couldn't fully explain, Victor felt he needed to find those letters. He felt there was something important there, some connection his subconscious had already made, but his conscious mind still didn't understand. He looked at the clock, 1:40 in the morning, but there was no possibility of sleeping now. Victor stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and climbed the narrow stairs leading to the attic. The space was dusty and full of stacked boxes, each labeled with Peter's impeccable handwriting. Victor searched until he found the ones that said, "Mother's Belongings." There were 4 boxes in total. He opened the first. Clothes, perfumes, personal items. The second contained books and diaries. The third, photographs and albums. It was in the fourth that he found what he was looking for, a small wooden box, locked with a simple padlock. Victor forced the padlock with a tool he found right there, and the lid opened with a creak. Inside, carefully preserved in envelopes yellowed, "With age" were the letters. Victor picked up the first and began to read, and with each word he felt as if the world around him disappeared. The letters were from a captain, writing to the mother of a fallen soldier. But they weren't formal, cold letters. They were personal letters, written with an empathy and understanding that transcended military duty. The captain spoke of Mark as a hero, but also as a man. He spoke of his hopes, his fears, his stories. He spoke of how Mark had saved the lives of his comrades, of how he was loved by all who served with him, and the captain promised, letter after letter, that Mark's memory would be honored, that his sacrifice would not be forgotten. Victor read each letter, his hands trembling slightly. There were more than 20 letters in total, written over 2 years after Mark's passing, and in each one the captain signed with the same name, Captain Robert Silver. Victor took out his phone and photographed one of the letters, focusing especially on the signature. Then he went down from the attic and returned to his office. He knew it was too late to call Peter, but he sent a message anyway. "Peter, I need you to research a Captain Robert Silver. He served in the army about 40 years ago. I want to know everything about him. Where he is now, what he does, if he has family. Urgent." He sent the message and leaned back in his chair. Something was beginning to take shape in his mind. A connection, a thread linking past and present. But it was still too vague, still didn't make complete sense. Victor looked out the window. The sky was slowly beginning to lighten, announcing another day, and somewhere in this city, Helen would wake up in a few hours for another impossible day of work and sacrifice. Rose would wake up in pain, trying to hide how much she was suffering to spare her daughter. And he, Victor Alliance, a man who had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, was discovering that wealth meant nothing if it couldn't be used to change lives that truly mattered. He thought of the letters, of how that unknown captain had saved his mother from a deep darkness, simply with words of kindness and recognition. And he wondered, for the first time in decades, if he would be able to do the same for someone, if he would be able to be for Helen and Rose what that captain had been for his family. The answer, he would soon discover, was closer than he imagined, and the connection between past and present was about to reveal a destiny that would change them all forever. Peter responded to Victor's message at 6 in the morning. He had preliminary information about Captain Robert Silver. Victor was awake, hadn't even tried to sleep, and picked up the phone on the first ring when Peter called. "Mr. Alliance, I found something," Peter said, his voice showing signs that he too had spent the night researching. "Captain Robert Silver served in the army for 35 years. He was decorated multiple times, commanded several battalions. He retired 20 years ago with all honors." "And where is he now?" There was a long pause. "Sir, he passed away 12 years ago, heart problem. But he left a wife and daughter. His wife also passed away 5 years ago. The daughter is still alive." Victor felt his heart race. "The daughter, where is she? What's her name?" "Rose." "Silver?" Peter said softly. "She's 43, works as a domestic cleaner. A widow, mother of a teenage daughter named Helen." Victor felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. He remained silent for a long moment, processing the information. Rose was Captain Robert Silver's daughter, the man whose letters had kept his mother alive during the darkest years of her life. "Sir," Peter asked, concerned by the silence, "are you listening?" "I am," Victor finally replied, his voice hoarser than usual. "Peter, I need you to bring me all the information you can get about the Silver family, about the captain, about Rose, about her husband, everything. I'm on it, sir, but may I ask why?" Victor looked at the letters scattered on his desk. "Because I owe this family more than they can imagine, and it's time to pay that debt." He hung up and remained seated in his office as the sun fully rose, bathing the city in a golden light. 50 years. 50 years ago, an unknown captain had saved his mother's sanity with words of kindness and recognition. And now, that same captain's granddaughter was destroying her life to save someone she loved. The circle was closing. Destiny, karma, divine providence. Victor didn't know what to call it, but he knew it wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Peter arrived 2 hours later with a folder full of documents. They sat in the office and Peter began to explain everything he had discovered. Captain Robert Silver was one of the most respected officers of his generation. After retiring, he dedicated himself to community work, especially helping veterans' families. He and his wife, Mrs. Teresa, lived modestly, despite their decorations and the respect they commanded. Victor listened intently, absorbing every detail. Rose was raised, with much love but little money. The captain spent most of his pension helping others. Rose married young at 20 to a man named John. They had Helen a year later. John worked in construction. He was a good man, hard-working, dedicated to his family. Was? Peter nodded sadly. John suffered a work accident 5 years ago, a fall from scaffolding. He didn't survive. Rose was widowed with a 12-year-old daughter to raise alone. That's when she started working as a domestic cleaner, first in several houses, until she got the steady job with you 3 years ago. Victor closed his eyes. Rose had worked for him for 3 years, and he had never bothered to know her story. He had never asked a single personal question beyond those related to work. "Continue," he said. Helen was always an exceptional student. Even after losing her father, she maintained impeccable grades. Rose did everything she could for her daughter to study. She worked double shifts, saved every penny. Her pride was seeing Helen shine in school. Until the diagnosis. Exactly. Lupus was diagnosed 5 weeks ago. Rose tried to hide it from Helen at first, but the disease progressed quickly. The pain, the fatigue, the evident physical symptoms. Helen found out and immediately dropped everything to care for her mother. Victor opened the folder and began to leaf through the documents. There were copies of Helen's school reports, all with perfect grades. There were certificates of academic competitions, honorable mentions, awards. There was also the university acceptance letter, promising a full scholarship for the engineering course. All this thrown away. A brilliant future sacrificed on the altar of filial love. And the worst part, Peter continued, is that Rose doesn't know half of what Helen is doing. She thinks her daughter is just helping out a little, doing some extra shifts. She doesn't know Helen completely dropped out of school. She doesn't know about the restaurant job. Helen hides everything from her. To spare her mother more suffering. Exactly. Victor stood up and walked to the window. Down below he saw Rose arriving for work. She limped slightly, leaning against the wall occasionally as she crossed the garden towards the service entrance. Even from a distance, he could see how she struggled with each step, how she forced her ailing body to keep functioning. "Peter," Victor said without turning, "I want you to hire the best lupus specialists you can find. I want a complete evaluation of Rose's case, and I want to know exactly what she needs to have a good quality of life." "Yes, sir. And what about them knowing?" "I still don't know. I need to think about how to approach this. If I simply show up and offer help, they will refuse. Pride is something I understand well." "There's something else you should know," Peter said hesitantly. "What?" Peter sighed. "Their financial situation is even worse than we thought. Rose tried to get a loan 2 weeks. It was denied due to her credit history. She also tried to sell some family belongings, items that belonged to her father, the captain, medals, military decorations, but she couldn't sell them for a fair price. Buyers knew she was desperate." Victor felt anger grow again. "She's selling her own father's memory to get money." "And Helen knows about this?" "I believe so," which probably only intensified her determination to work even harder. Victor returned to his desk and opened one of the drawers. Inside there was a small safe where he kept some personal items. He opened it and took out a medal. It was the posthumous decoration Mark had received, presented to the family in recognition of his service and sacrifice. "Look at this, Peter," Victor said, showing the medal. "My brother died serving the country, and the captain who commanded his battalion, who wrote those letters to my mother, who kept our family together when everything was falling apart, was Rose's father. Now she's selling his medals, her own father's, because she's desperate. And I, who owe so much to this family, was too blind to see. It's not your fault, sir. You couldn't have known. But I should have asked. I should have cared. Rose has worked for me for 3 years, and I never asked about her life, about her family, about anything. I treated her as just another efficient employee, not as a human being with her own history and dignity." Peter said nothing. He had known Victor long enough to know when it was time to be silent. "I need to think of a plan," Victor finally said. "A plan that respects their pride, that doesn't make them feel like objects of charity. Because I know if I simply show up with a check, I will insult them, and they deserve more than that." "May I suggest something?" Peter offered. "Please. You mentioned that your mother had set up a fund many years ago, a fund to help military veterans' families. It was never officially activated, right?" Victor nodded. "It was one of the last things she did before she passed. She said she wanted to repay the captain's kindness, to help other families going through what she went through. But we never found the right way to implement it. The fund remained dormant all these years. Then perhaps it's time to activate it. With Rose as the project director." Victor looked at Peter with surprise. "Continue." "Rose is a veteran's daughter. She herself went through the difficulties of a military family. She has the lived experience, the necessary empathy, and it wouldn't be charity, it would be a real job, a position with dignity. She would receive a fair salary for important work, and as part of the job benefits, she would have access to a comprehensive health plan and adequate financial support." Victor considered the idea. It was brilliant in its simplicity. It wasn't arms. It was recognition. It was giving Rose a position where she could use her own experience to help others, while also being helped. "But she needs to recover first," Victor said. "She needs immediate treatment, and Helen needs to go back to school. One step at a time, sir." "No," Victor said firmly. "There's no time for calculated steps. Rose could get worse if we don't treat this immediately, and Helen is losing her future with each passing day. We need to act now." "And how do you intend to do that without them suspecting or being offended?" Victor thought for a long moment. Then an idea began to form. "I'll talk to them tonight. I'll be honest about everything, about the letters, about the connection with the captain, about the debt my family has to theirs, and I'll offer it not as charity, but as what it truly is: delayed justice." "It might work," Peter said thoughtfully, "or it might scare them. I'll have to risk it." That afternoon, Victor did something he had never done. He called Rose and asked her and Helen to come to his office at 7 in the evening. He said he needed to talk about something important, but didn't reveal what. Rose hesitated, clearly worried, but agreed. The hours until 7 seemed to drag on eternally. Victor mentally rehearsed what he would say, trying to find the right words. How do you tell someone you've discovered the most intimate secrets of their life? How do you offer help without sounding condescending? When he finally heard the doorbell ring, Victor felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced in decades. Peter went to answer and guided Rose and Helen to the office. They entered hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable in that formal environment. Rose wore her work uniform, and Helen wore simple, worn clothes. Both looked exhausted and apprehensive. "Rose, Helen, please sit down," Victor said, pointing to the comfortable armchairs in front of his desk. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Mr. Alliance," Rose replied, her voice tense. "Has something gone wrong with my work?" No, Victor hastened to say. "On the contrary, I need to talk to you about something very personal, and I need you to listen to me until the end before saying anything." The two exchanged a worried look, but nodded. Victor took a deep breath. 50 years ago, my older brother served in the army. His name was Mark. He was an extraordinary man, brilliant, courageous. He didn't return from the battlefield. Rose and Helen remained silent, not yet understanding where this was going. When my brother passed, my mother was devastated. She never fully recovered. But there was something that kept her alive, that prevented her from giving up entirely. It was the letters she received from Mark's commanding officer, a captain who wrote to her regularly, telling stories about Mark, assuring her that his sacrifice had meaning, that he was loved and respected. Rose began to grow pale. Her hands gripped the arms of the armchair. "Those letters," Victor continued, "were the only thing that kept my mother alive in those terrible years. And she always said she owed everything to that captain, that she would like to thank him one day. But she never could. And then she passed 10 years ago with that gratitude still in her heart." Victor picked up one of the old letters and showed it to them. The captain's name was Robert Silver. Rose let out a gasp. Her eyes filled with tears. "My father," she whispered. "Your father," Victor confirmed. "His letters saved my mother, Rose. Literally. And I never knew it until last night, when I finally opened her belongings and found those letters. I read each one. I read how your father saw my brother, how he cared for his soldiers, how he understood the pain of a mother who had lost a son." Helen looked from her mother to Victor, trying to understand where the conversation was going. "I also discovered," Victor continued, looking now at Helen, "that you are one of the brightest students in this country, that you had a guaranteed scholarship at the university, and that you dropped everything 3 weeks ago." Helen paled. "How do you know that, sir?" "Because I have the resources to find things out, Helen, and because, when I saw you in my kitchen at 4 in the morning with injured hands, I knew something was very wrong. So I investigated. And I found out not only about the school, but about the restaurant, about the debts, about the eviction notice, about everything." Rose began to cry silently. "Mr. Alliance, I didn't want anyone to know. We're dealing with it. We'll find a solution." "I know you will," Victor said gently, "because you are strong and proud as the captain was. But you don't have to do this alone, and not because I pity you, but because my family has a debt to yours, a 50-year debt that needs to be paid." "We are not charity," Rose said with dignity, even through tears. "And I'm not offering charity," Victor replied. "I'm offering justice. I'm offering what my mother would have offered if she were alive and knew your situation." "Mother," she whispered, tears now falling freely. "My father always talked about the soldiers he commanded, about how precious each one of them was. He took it so seriously. He spent his whole life trying to honor their memory. And now it's my turn to honor his memory," Victor said, "and to ensure that his granddaughter doesn't lose the brilliant future she deserves." Helen finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Mr. Alliance, I can't accept. My mother needs me. I can't just go back to school and pretend everything is fine." "You won't pretend," Victor said, "because we will make everything truly fine. Your mother will have the best treatment available. You won't lose your home, and you will go back to school and earn that scholarship again." "But how?" Helen asked, her voice cracking. "How will we pay for all this?" Victor looked at Rose. "I have a proposal. My mother, before she passed, created a fund aimed at helping military veterans' families in vulnerable situations. The fund was never officially activated because we didn't find the right person to lead it, someone who truly understood what these families go through, someone with empathy, lived experience, and dignity." Rose looked at him with wide eyes. "I want you to be the director of this fund, Rose. It's a real job, with a decent salary and all. Benefits, including the best health plan money can buy. You would use your own experience to help other families, to ensure that no one else goes through what you went through. It's not charity. It's recognition of what you and your family represent." Rose and Helen remained silent for a long moment, processing the proposal. Victor could see the internal battle happening on their faces, pride fighting against need, hope fighting against the fear of disappointing. Finally, Rose spoke. "But I'm sick. How can I lead something like that if I can barely work?" "That's why treatment comes first," Victor explained. "You will get treated, you will recover, and then you will take on the position. It may take months, but time is not a problem. The important thing is that you get well. And in the meantime, Helen goes back to school. You will have everything you need, not as a favor, but as a right, as part of the compensation for everything the captain did for my family." Helen looked at her mother. "Mother," she said softly, "please, let him help." Rose closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "My father always said that helping others was the most important thing, that we all need help at some point, but it's so hard to accept." "I know," Victor said. "I know because I'm exactly like that. Proud, independent. But sometimes receiving help is the bravest thing we can do. Not for ourselves, but for the people we love and who depend on us." Rose opened her eyes and looked directly at Victor. "If I accept this," she said firmly, "it won't be as your employee. It will be as a professional doing important work, with dignity." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Victor replied, smiling slightly. Rose nodded. Slowly. "Then I accept. For Helen, for my father's memory, and because I know he would have been proud to know that his actions helped someone decades later." Helen let out a sob and hugged her mother. Rose held her tightly, and for the first time in weeks, there was hope on her face. Victor watched them, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just satisfaction from doing a good deed. It was connection. It was purpose. It was the feeling that, finally, after decades wandering in his private emptiness, he had found something that truly mattered. But what none of them knew yet was that this would be only the first of many battles. Because life rarely allows easy victories. And the path between that moment of hope and the bright future they all envisioned would be full of obstacles that would test not only their resources, but their determination, their faith in each other, and their ability to stay together when everything seemed to fall apart. But for that night, for that precious moment, they had hope. And sometimes hope is all we need to take the next step. The hope from the previous night lasted exactly until the next morning, when reality began to show its sharp claws. Victor had booked an appointment with London's best lupus specialists for Rose, but when Peter tried to schedule it for that same week, he found that their schedules were fully booked. The earliest they could get was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks, Victor repeated in disbelief, pacing his office. Rose doesn't have 3 weeks to wait. Look at her, Peter. Every day she gets weaker. Peter sighed. I can try other specialists, but the situation is the same across the city. They are highly sought after. Professionals. Or we could try another city, but that would mean Rose traveling, and I don't know if she's in a condition to do so. Is there a private specialist? Someone who consults privately? There is, yes. Dr. Luke Carmine. He's considered one of the best in the country for autoimmune diseases, but he doesn't accept insurance. It's entirely private care, and the costs are substantial. I don't care about costs. Book an appointment with him. For today, if possible. Peter made the necessary calls and, using Victor's name and influence, secured an appointment for that afternoon. When Rose was informed, she hesitated. Mr. Alliance, I don't know if it's appropriate. This must cost a fortune. Rose, Victor said gently, we talked about this yesterday. You accepted my help. So please, allow me to help in the way I know best. She nodded reluctantly, but Victor could see gratitude mixed with discomfort in her eyes. Pride was a difficult thing to overcome, even when the need was dire. The consultation with Dr. Carmine took place at 3 in the afternoon. Victor insisted on accompanying Rose personally, also bringing Peter and Helen. The office was elegant, in one of London's most upscale districts, and the reception looked more like a 5-star hotel than a medical clinic. Dr. Carmine was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a presence that inspired immediate confidence. He examined Rose for almost 2 hours, ordered a battery of tests, and finally called everyone to talk in his office. Mrs. Rose, he began, his voice serious but gentle, I'm going to be direct with you. Your condition is serious. The lupus is in an active and aggressive phase. If we don't treat this immediately, you risk permanent damage to your kidneys, heart, and nervous system. Rose paled. Helen held her hand tightly. But there is treatment, the doctor continued. With the right medication, lifestyle changes, and constant monitoring, we can control the disease and give you an excellent quality of life. It won't be easy, and it will take time, but it's entirely possible. How long? Rose asked in a weak voice. To stabilize the condition? A few months? To ensure it's controlled? Perhaps a year of intensive treatment and constant monitoring. And the costs? The doctor looked at Victor before answering. That will be discussed with Mr. Alliance. Your responsibility now, Mrs. Rose, is to take care of yourself and strictly follow the treatment I will prescribe. When they left the office, Rose was paler than when she entered. Helen supported her carefully, and Victor could see the fear in both their eyes. A year of intensive treatment. 12 months. That seemed like an eternity when each day was already a struggle. In the car, Rose finally broke down. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming. "I'm sorry for being a burden to everyone. I'm sorry Helen has to go through this. I'm sorry for—" "Mom, stop," Helen interrupted, hugging her. "You're not a burden, never have been, and we'll get through this together." Victor, sitting in the front seat, turned to look at them. "Rose," he said firmly, "you will recover. We will do everything necessary, and Helen will go back to school. That's what your father would have wanted. That's what we're going to do." Rose nodded through her tears, but Victor could see that she still carried deep guilt. The guilt of needing help. The guilt of her daughter sacrificing her future. The guilt of not being strong enough to solve everything alone. The next day, Victor and Peter went to the school where Helen studied. St. Peter's State College was a large old building, with faded walls but still imposing. Victor asked to speak with the principal, Principal Agnes Miller, a woman in her 50s, known for her strict adherence to regulations. She received them in her office, sitting behind a desk covered in papers. Her expression was that of someone who had already made a decision and was not interested in changing it. "Mr. Alliance," she began, "I understand your concern for Helen. She truly was one of our best students. But the rules are clear. She dropped out of school without justification, missed 3 weeks of classes and exams. There's no way to make that up." "What if we provide a medical justification now?" Victor asked. "Her mother is seriously ill. Helen had to take on responsibilities that no teenager should have." "I understand the situation," Agnes replied, "but that doesn't change the fact that the deadline for enrollment and make-up classes has expired. The school year is almost over. Even if I wanted to make an exception, the system doesn't allow it." Peter leaned forward. "With all due respect, Principal Miller, we are talking about one of the brightest students this school has ever had, a girl who represented the country in international competitions. Surely there's some way to bend the rules for exceptional cases." Agnes crossed her arms. "Sir, if I make an exception for Helen, I'll have to make one for all other students in difficult situations. And where would that end? Rules exist for a reason." Victor felt frustration grow, but he kept his voice calm. "Principal Miller, I'm not asking you to break rules. I'm asking you to find a solution within the system. Make-up exams, extra assignments, anything that allows Helen to catch up on what she missed." "Impossible. The other students have already taken their exams. It would be unfair to give her a second chance." "And is it fair," Victor asked, his voice growing colder, "to condemn a brilliant girl to lose her future because she was caring for a sick mother? Is that the message this school wants to convey? That education is only for those whose lives are perfect and without problems?" Agnes was silent for a moment, clearly bothered by the accusation, but not backing down. "Mr. Alliance, I understand that you have resources and influence, but you can't simply buy a solution for this. The educational system has procedures and they exist to protect all students." "I'm not trying to buy anything," Victor replied. "I'm fighting for a girl who deserves a second chance, a girl whose only crime was loving her mother enough to sacrifice everything for her." Agnes took a deep breath. "I will consult the school board, but I can't promise anything. And even if they agree, Helen would have to take all final exams in less than 2 weeks. In addition to submitting assignments and projects she missed, it's practically impossible." "She will succeed," Victor said with conviction. "Just give her the chance." When they left the school, Peter shook his head. "She won't give in easily. I saw it in her eyes." "Then we'll have to be creative," Victor responded. He took out his phone and called one of his most influential contacts in the city, a member of the Municipal Education Board. If Agnes didn't want to be reasonable, he would use every tool available. Meanwhile, Helen had returned to the restaurant to inform Alan that she was quitting. She didn't tell Victor about it, knowing he would object, but she felt she needed to close that chapter herself, in the dignified way she could. Alan was not happy with the news. "You think you can just leave like that?" he asked aggressively, blocking her exit. "I'm giving you notice," Helen said, trying to keep her voice firm despite her fear. "I'll work another week if necessary." "A week?" Alan scoffed. "You owe me at least a month. Or do you think I'll just let you abandon your post? It's not abandonment, it's notice. And if I don't accept, what if I call the inspection and report that you're working illegally here?" Helen paled. That was his greatest threat, the sword Alan always held over her head. "You wouldn't do that." "Try me." It was at that moment that Victor entered the restaurant. He had asked Peter to keep someone discreetly watching Helen, and when he learned she had gone to confront Alan, he came immediately. "Is there a problem here?" Victor asked, his voice sharp as ice. Alan turned, clearly surprised by the presence of an obviously wealthy and powerful man. "And who are you?" "I'm Victor Alliance, and Helen works for me, or rather she did, because she just resigned from this establishment, and you will graciously accept it." Alan tried to regain his composure. "That's none of your business. It's between me and my employee. Your underage employee, working illegal hours, without proper registration," Victor said calmly. "I'm sure the labor authorities would be very interested to know about that, as would child protection agencies. And the health inspector, since I'm here, I've noticed several irregularities in this establishment." Alan turned red. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating facts," Victor replied. "Helen is leaving now, without working another day here, and you will pay her everything you owe, including unpaid overtime, or I'll be very happy to make a series of calls that will make your life extremely difficult." The manager hesitated, his bravado disappearing before the real threat. He went to the cash register, took out some money, and threw the notes towards Helen. "Take it and leave, and don't come back here again." Helen picked up the money with trembling hands. Victor placed a protective hand on her shoulder and guided her out of the restaurant. Only when they were in the car did she finally break down, sobbing. "I was afraid of him," she admitted through tears. "Every day I was afraid, but I couldn't leave because I needed the money." "I know," Victor said softly. "But now you don't need to be afraid anymore. Of anything." "But the school," Helen said, wiping her tears. "The principal won't readmit me, will she? I'm still working on that. What if she doesn't let me? What if I lose everything anyway?" Victor looked at her directly. "Helen, I'm going to tell you something. When I started my business 40 years ago, no one believed I would succeed. They said it was impossible, that I had no experience, that I was dreaming too big. But I didn't give up, and do you know why? Why? Because I discovered that the word impossible only exists for those who give up before trying all options. And I haven't tried all options for you yet. Not even close." In the following days, Victor mobilized every contact he had. He called members of the education board, politicians he had supported over the years, influential businessmen who had connections with the educational system. He wasn't used to asking for favors, but he discovered that when the cause was just, pride was something that could be swallowed. Finally, after a week of constant pressure, Agnes Miller called. Her voice was tense but resigned. "The school board has agreed to make an exception. Helen can return, but she will have to take all final exams in 2 weeks, without any facilitation or extra help. If she doesn't get the necessary grades, her readmission will be automatically cancelled." "She will succeed," Victor said, with a conviction he wasn't sure he truly felt. "I hope so," Agnes replied. "For her sake, I truly hope so." When Victor gave Helen the news, she remained silent for a long moment. Then she asked the question that was tormenting her. "How am I going to do this? It's 3 weeks of material I missed. Exams in all subjects, assignments, projects. It's impossible to do everything in 2 weeks while still caring for my mother." "You won't do it alone," Victor said. "We will hire the best tutors we can find, private teachers for each subject. They will come to your home, work with you as many hours as necessary. And as for caring for your mother, we will hire a nurse to help. Not to replace you, but to provide support." Helen began to cry again, but this time they were tears of gratitude mixed with exhaustion. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Victor thought of the letters, of Captain Robert Silver, of 50 years of an unpaid debt. He thought of his mother, of how those words of kindness had kept her alive. He thought of Mark, of what it would have been like if someone had helped his family when they needed it most. "Because it's the right thing to do," he finally replied, "and because you deserve it." But deep down, Victor knew there was more. There was the feeling that, for the first time in decades, his life had a real purpose. It wasn't about money or business success. It was about making a tangible difference in the lives of people who truly mattered. It was about connection, about paying not just financial debts but moral and emotional ones. It was about discovering that even at 62, there was still time to be more than just a rich and lonely man. There was time to be someone who mattered, someone who made a difference, someone who, when leaving this world, would leave more than just a financial empire. He would leave transformed lives. And as he watched Helen wipe away her tears and lift her face with renewed determination, Victor knew he was only at the beginning of this journey. That there would be more obstacles, more challenges, more moments when everything would seem impossible. But he also knew with a certainty he hadn't felt in years that it would be worth it. Every second, every effort, every tear, and every victory, everything would be worth it. Because sometimes the best legacy we can leave is not money or property. It's the certainty that we made a difference, that we mattered, that our passage through this world left things a little better than we found them. And Victor Alliance was determined to leave exactly that, no matter the cost or how long it took. He would see Helen back in school, Rose recovered, and that family honoring the memory of Captain Robert Silver in the way he deserved to be honored, with dignity, with hope, and with a bright future ahead. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Victor hired 5 private tutors, each a specialist in their field. They took turns at Rose and Helen's home, teaching mathematics, physics, chemistry, English, and history. The small living room of the apartment was transformed into an improvised classroom, with books stacked everywhere and notes taped to the walls. Helen studied 16 hours a day. She woke up at 5 in the morning, studied until midnight, stopping only for quick meals and to spend some time with her mother. The teachers were impressed by her ability to absorb information. Even after 3 weeks away, she managed to catch up on the material with surprising speed. But the effort took its toll. Helen lost weight quickly, developed deep dark circles under her eyes, and occasionally had crying spells when she thought no one was watching. Victor spent every day at the apartment, observing discreetly, making sure she had everything she needed. Rose, meanwhile, began her treatment. The nurse Victor had hired, a kind woman named Anna, came 3 times a week to administer medications and monitor vital signs. Rose showed slow but steady improvement. The pain decreased, she could sleep better, and a little color returned to her face. "It seems to be working," Rose said one afternoon, sitting on the small balcony of the apartment with Victor. "The treatment. I'm feeling a little better every day." "It's a process," Victor replied. "Dr. Carmine said it would take time, but you're on the right track." Rose looked into the apartment, where Helen was bent over another book, her expression tense with concentration. "I'm worried about her. She's pushing herself too hard. I'm afraid that even if she passes the exams, the effort will have destroyed something inside her." "She's stronger than you imagine," Victor said. "Just like you." Rose smiled sadly. "My father used to say that strength isn't in never falling, but in always getting up. But what if we no longer have the strength to get up?" "That's when the people around us help us stand," Victor replied. "That's when we discover we're not alone." It was on the 10th night of study that the first major crisis happened. Helen was doing a particularly difficult calculus exercise when suddenly she threw her pencil away and began to sob uncontrollably. "I can't do it," she cried, her voice breaking. "It's too much. It's impossible. I'm going to fail and lose everything anyway, so why am I killing myself like this?" The math tutor, Peter, who by coincidence had the same name as Victor's assistant, but was not the same person, tried to calm her, but Helen was beyond the point of being consoled. Rose came running from the bedroom, ignoring the pain in her joints, and hugged her daughter. It's okay, my dear. If it's too much, you can stop. Your health is more important than any exam. No, Helen cried. I can't stop. Not after everything Mr. Alliance has done. Not after you're finally getting better. I have to succeed. I have to. But she continued crying, and Rose just held her own tears beginning to fall. The tutor discreetly withdrew, calling Victor to inform him of the situation. Victor arrived 20 minutes later. He found mother and daughter still embracing on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered books and papers. He knelt beside them and waited until Helen was calmer before speaking. Helen, you need to hear something, Victor said gently. You're not doing this for me. You're not doing this to pay a debt or to meet expectations. You're doing this for yourself, for your future, and if it's too much, if it's unsustainable, then we will find another way. There's no other way, Helen said, her voice hoarse from crying so much. If I don't pass these exams, I lose my university scholarship. If I lose the scholarship, I lose my future. It's that simple. Nothing is that simple, Victor replied. There are always other ways, other plans, other possibilities, but not if you destroy yourself trying to follow only one of them. He picked up one of the books from the floor and opened it. Look at this. Mathematics. You've always been brilliant in mathematics. You won national competitions. This content is in your head, Helen. You're just so tired that you can't access it now. I'm so scared, she admitted. Scared of failing. Scared of disappointing everyone. Scared that all this has been in vain. Victor looked at Rose, who nodded slightly. Then he made a decision. Tomorrow, there will be no studying. You will rest. You will sleep in. You will go for a walk. You will do anything but look at books. And the day after tomorrow, we will start again, but differently. Fewer hours, more efficiency. Quality over quantity. But there are only 5 days left until the exams, Helen protested. And 5 days are more than enough if you are rested and focused. But if you continue like this, you will enter the exam room so exhausted that you won't even be able to remember your own name. Rose agreed. He's right, daughter. You need to rest. Helen hesitated, but finally nodded. Victor helped them both up and stayed there until he was sure Helen had gone to sleep. Then, before leaving, he quickly spoke with Rose in the kitchen. Will she make it, Rose? Victor asked, revealing for the first time his own insecurity. Rose looked down the hallway where her daughter's bedroom was. She's like her father. When she decides to do something, there's nothing that can stop her, and she decided to pass these exams. So yes, she will make it. The question is, at what cost? And it was that night, as Victor returned to his empty mansion, that he realized how important those 2 women had become to him. They were not just objects of his charity or moral debts to be paid. They were people he genuinely cared about, whose suffering affected him, whose success mattered deeply to him. He thought of Mark, of what it would have been like to have his brother by his side all these years. He thought of his mother, of how she would have loved to meet Helen and Rose, of how proud she would have been to see Captain Silver's granddaughter become such an extraordinary young woman. And for the first time since losing Mark, Victor felt he had a family again, not by blood, but by choice, by connection, by shared purpose. The next day, as promised, Helen rested. Victor showed up in the morning with a surprise. Tickets to the London Zoo. Rose initially protested, saying she didn't feel well enough, but Victor insisted, and Anna, the nurse, assured them that Rose was well enough for a light outing. It was a strange and wonderful day. Victor hadn't been to a zoo in decades, and watching Helen slowly relax as she observed the animals was one of the most gratifying experiences he'd had in years. Rose also seemed refreshed, laughing at some of the monkeys' antics and taking photos with a simple phone Victor had given her. For a few hours, they weren't a millionaire and his protégés. They were just 3 people sharing a moment of simple joy amidst the chaos of their lives. "Thank you," Helen said to Victor as they watched the flamingos, "for making me forget for a moment how terrified I am." "Fear is part of it," Victor replied, "but it can't be all you feel. Otherwise, even if you pass the exams, fear will have stolen the joy of achievement." When they returned home, Helen seemed like a different person, lighter, more centered, and when she resumed her studies the next day, her approach changed. She was more focused, more efficient, not trying to absorb everything at once, but prioritizing what was most important. The tutors noticed the difference immediately. "She's ready," the physics tutor told Victor. "She might not know absolutely everything, but she knows enough and has confidence. That counts for a lot." The days passed quickly. 3 days before the exams, Rose had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Carmine. Victor insisted on going along, and what they heard was encouraging. "The inflammatory markers are significantly decreasing," the doctor explained. "The treatment is working better than I expected. If we continue like this within a few months, Mrs. Rose will be in almost complete remission." Rose began to cry, with relief. Anna, who was also present, gently held her hand. Victor felt deep satisfaction. It was working. Everything was working, but life has a cruel way of reminding us that nothing is guaranteed. On the night before the first day of exams, Rose woke up with intense chest pains. Helen found her in the bathroom, pale and sweating profusely, barely able to breathe. She immediately called Anna, who instructed them to call an ambulance. Victor received the call at 2 in the morning. He was at the hospital 20 minutes later, still in his pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. He found Helen in the waiting room, trembling not from cold but from fear. "She was fine today," Helen said, her voice hollow. "She was so well, laughing, making plans. How can she be like this now?" Victor had no answer. He just sat beside her and waited. Anna arrived shortly after, followed by Peter with clothes and coffee for everyone. The hours passed slowly. Doctors came and went, their professional expressions revealing nothing. Finally, at 5 in the morning, Dr. Carmine appeared. Victor didn't know he had been called, but silently thanked the doctor for his presence. "She had an acute crisis," the doctor explained. "An adverse reaction to one of the medications. It's rare, but it happens. We had to stabilize her and change the treatment protocol." "Will she be okay?" Helen asked, her voice breaking. "She will," the doctor assured, "but she'll need to stay hospitalized for a few days for monitoring. It's a preventive measure." "Can I see her?" "You can, but she's sleeping now. The sedatives are still taking effect." Helen looked at the clock. 7 in the morning. The exams started at 9. She had 2 hours to go home, get ready, and get to school. But how could she do that? How could she leave her mother in the hospital and go take an exam as if nothing had happened? "I can't," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't leave her here alone. The exams don't matter. Nothing matters if she's not well." Victor placed his hands on her shoulders. "Helen, look at me. Your mother is stable. The doctors are taking care of her. And do you know what she'll want when she wakes up? She'll want to know if you went to take those exams. If you give up now, you'll break her heart. But what if something happens while I'm there?" "Nothing will happen," Dr. Carmine intervened, "and if anything changes, I'll personally call you. But your mother is out of danger now. The worst is over." Helen looked at Anna, seeking confirmation. The nurse nodded. "She's stable, dear. I'll stay here the whole time. I won't leave her side for a minute." "I'll stay too," Victor added. "Peter will take you home to get ready and then to school. And I'll stay here. If your mother wakes up, I'll be here, I promise." Helen hesitated, torn between filial duty and responsibility for her future. Finally, she looked at Dr. Carmine. "Is she really out of danger?" "Truly, you have my word." Helen took a deep breath and nodded. "All right. I'll take the exams. For her. Because I know that's what she wants." Peter drove her home. She took a quick shower, put on her school uniform, and gathered her materials. During the entire drive to school, she remained silent, looking out the window, clearly not mentally present. When they arrived at school, Peter held her hand for a moment. "You can do it. Remember, everything you studied. Remember why you're doing this." Helen nodded and got out of the car. She walked to the school entrance like a person in a trance. Other students passed her, chatting animatedly, nervous about the exams, but not carrying the weight she carried. She entered the room, sat at her desk and looked at the blank paper in front of her. The teacher began to distribute the exams. And then Helen closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought of her mother, sleeping in the hospital. She thought of her father, whom she had lost 5 years ago. She thought of her grandfather, Captain Robert Silver, whom she had known as a child, a man who always spoke about honor, duty, and doing what was right even when it was difficult. And she thought of Victor, a stranger who had become her greatest anchor, who believed in her when she herself doubted. When she opened her eyes, there was a new clarity there. She picked up the pen, read the first question, and began to write. And as she wrote, at the hospital, Rose finally woke up. Her first question was about Helen. Victor held her hand and said that Helen was doing exactly what she should be doing, fighting, persevering, honoring everything Rose had taught her. Rose smiled through her weakness. "She's strong," she whispered, "like her father, like her grandfather." "She is," Victor agreed, "and like you. Because sometimes strength isn't in never falling. It's in getting up every time we fall. It's in continuing even when every fiber of our being wants to give up. It's in believing that the sun will rise again, even on the darkest night." And as Helen faced her first exam of that decisive day, everyone who loved her held their breath, rooting, hoping, believing. Because if there was one thing those last few weeks had proven, it was that miracles happen, not in the way we expect, not without pain or sacrifice, but they happen. And sometimes all we need to do is have enough courage to take one more step, and then another and another, until suddenly we look back and realize how far we've come. And Helen was about to discover exactly how far her courage could take her. Helen took 6 exams over 3 days. Each morning she woke up, quickly visited her mother at the hospital, where Rose insisted she go straight to school, and then faced more hours of intense examinations. At night, she returned to the hospital, studied for the next day's exam beside Rose's bed, and slept only a few hours before starting all over again. They were the 3 hardest days of her life, but every time she felt like giving up, she looked at her mother, saw Victor sitting there, faithfully fulfilling his promise not to leave her alone, and found the strength to continue. On the morning of the 4th day, Rose was finally discharged. Dr. Carmine had adjusted her medications and she was stable again. Victor insisted on driving them home personally, and when they entered the apartment, they found something unexpected. The space had been transformed, not drastically, but there were fresh flowers in vases. The refrigerator was full of healthy and nutritious food, and there was a new, comfortable chair in the living room, perfect for Rose to rest. "Peter did this," Victor explained, when he saw their surprised expressions. "He thought you deserved to come back to a welcoming home." Rose began to cry again. She had been crying a lot lately, but now they were tears of gratitude, not despair. "How can we ever repay all this?" "You don't need to repay anything," Victor said. "Just get well. That's all I need." Helen, exhausted but relieved to have her mother home, finally allowed herself to relax. The exams were done. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the results, which would be released in a week. That week was strangely quiet. Rose continued her treatment, now with an adjusted protocol that did not cause the previous adverse reactions. Helen slept, recovering from weeks of extreme effort, and Victor, for the first time in decades, found himself visiting that modest apartment almost every day, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. He had dinner with them, talked about trivialities, listened to Rose's stories about her father, the captain, and about her husband, John. He got to know Helen not just as the brilliant student, but as the young woman who loved old movies, who had a dry sense of humor when relaxed, who dreamed not only of being an engineer, but of using her education to help underprivileged communities. And each day Victor felt the emptiness he had carried for so long being filled, not with grand gestures or monumental achievements, but with simple moments of true human connection. It was Peter who brought the news a week later. He called Victor early in the morning, his voice containing barely contained excitement. "Mr. Alliance, I just received a call from the school." "And?" "Helen passed all the exams." "Not just passed, sir. She placed first in 4 of the 6 subjects. Her grades were exceptional." Victor felt a wave of relief and pride so intense that he had to sit down. Even though he had believed in Helen, a part of him had doubted if she could overcome all the adversities. The university scholarship has been reinstated. The university coordinator has already called to confirm that her place is guaranteed for the next semester. Victor immediately called Rose, who had also just received the call from the school. She was crying, laughing, and trying to speak all at once. Helen had gone to buy bread and didn't know yet, but Rose was bursting with pride and joy. When Helen returned and was informed, her reaction was different. She didn't jump, she didn't scream. She just stood, there in the middle of the living room, processing the information. Then, slowly, a genuine smile began to form on her face, the first in months. "I did it," she said softly, as if she could barely believe it. "I really did it." "We always knew you would," Rose said, hugging her daughter. Victor arrived an hour later, bringing with him a small box. Inside was a simple but elegant pen. "It belonged to my brother Mark," he explained. "He used it to write letters home. I want you to have it, Helen, to remember that there's always someone rooting for you, even when times are tough." Helen took the pen with reverence, her hands trembling slightly. "I will never forget what you did for us. Never. Just promise that you will use this education to make a difference in the world. That's all I ask. I promise." In the following weeks, Victor officially began to activate the fund his mother had created decades ago. With Peter's help and a team of lawyers, he structured a proper foundation, with bylaws, clear objectives, and substantial resources. And as promised, he offered Rose the position of project director. But not immediately. First, she needed to recover completely. The next 6 months would be dedicated to her treatment and rehabilitation. During that time, Victor hired consultants to prepare Rose for the role. She would learn about fund management, about how to evaluate cases and needs, about the legal aspects of helping vulnerable families. It would not be a symbolic job. It would be real, challenging, and important. Rose absorbed everything with fierce dedication. Victor saw in her the same brilliance he saw in Helen, the same determination, the same refusal to accept limitations. Rose's health consistently improved. The lupus, though still present, was controlled. She gained weight, regained energy, and most importantly, regained hope. The months passed. Helen returned to school, now no longer overwhelmed, able to be just a teenager in her final year. She reconnected with friends, participated in academic clubs again, and slowly rebuilt the life she had sacrificed. Victor, in turn, found himself changed. His mansion no longer seemed so empty. Not because he had filled it with things, but because his heart was fuller. He had purpose, he had connections, he had people who mattered. Occasionally he still had insomnia, but now, when he couldn't sleep, he didn't wander alone through the cold corridors. He called Rose or Helen, talked about trivialities, and then slept peacefully, knowing that he was making a difference in someone's life. It was during the winter, 6 months after that fateful dawn in the kitchen, that Rose finally officially took up her position at the foundation. The ceremony was small, with only close people, but for Rose it was monumental. Victor introduced her to the small team that had been hired to help her. There weren't many, just 3 people, but they were dedicated and shared the vision of helping veterans' families. Rose gave a short speech, her voice firm despite her emotion. "My father always said that serving the country didn't end when you took off the uniform. That true honor was in continuing to serve in any way possible. He lived that until his last day. And now, it's my turn to honor that legacy. Not just his memory, but the memory of all who served and sacrificed, and of their families who also sacrificed so much." Victor felt tears in his eyes as he listened. He thought of Mark, of how proud he would have been of that moment. He thought of his mother, of how she would have loved to meet Rose and Helen, and he thought of the letters, of those kind words a captain had written decades ago, unaware that they were planting seeds that would blossom half a century later in a way no one could have predicted. The months continued to pass. Helen prepared for university entrance exams, studying now with balance and joy, not with despair. Rose worked tirelessly at the foundation, already helping her first families, discovering that she had a natural talent for the work. And Victor watched it all, feeling more alive than he had in decades. It was in late November, almost a year after that encounter in the kitchen, that Helen's graduation day arrived. The event would be held in the school auditorium, and all final-year students would participate. Victor received a special invitation, not just as a guest, but as a speaker. Principal Miller, who had initially been so resistant to helping Helen, had changed her mind after witnessing the girl's transformation. She had asked Victor to speak about determination and overcoming adversity. But Victor gently refused. "It's not me who should speak," he said. "It's Helen. Her story is the one that needs to be told." Agnes agreed, and Helen was chosen to give the graduation speech as the class representative. She was nervous when she found out, but Rose and Victor encouraged her. "You have a story that needs to be heard," Victor said. "A story about sacrifice, about love, about not giving up even when everything seems impossible. People need to hear that." Graduation night arrived. The auditorium was packed with family, friends, and teachers. Helen waited backstage, her graduation dress simple but beautiful, her diploma about to be delivered. Rose was in the front row, beaming with pride, her health restored to the point where almost no one would believe she had been so ill a year ago. Victor sat beside her, Peter on the other side. When it was Helen's turn to speak, she walked onto the stage with a quiet grace. She looked at the audience, found her mother's and Victor's eyes, and began. "When we think of success," she said, her clear voice echoing through the auditorium, "we usually think of individual achievements, perfect grades, awards won, competitions conquered. I had all of that. And then I almost lost everything." She paused, letting the words resonate. "A year ago, my mother fell ill, and I made a decision. I dropped out of school. I gave up my dreams. Because what is an individual dream when the person you love most is suffering?" Rose discreetly wiped away tears. "But then I learned something. I learned that success isn't just about what we achieve alone. It's about the people who help us up when we fall. It's about the kindness of strangers who become family. It's about moral debts that transcend generations." Helen looked directly at Victor. "My grandfather, whom I barely knew, but whose legacy I carry, once wrote letters to a mother who had lost a son. He didn't have to do that, it wasn't his obligation, but he did it because he believed that small acts of kindness could change lives. And he was right, because 50 years later, those letters came back to bless my family in a way no one could have imagined." The audience was completely silent, each person absorbing her words. "So when you leave here today," Helen continued, "with your diplomas and your plans for the future, remember one thing. True success is not measured by what we accumulate, but by the impact we have, by the lives we touch, by the differences we make." She paused one last time, her final words filled with emotion. "Do not turn your face away from another's pain, because we never know when a small gesture of kindness today will turn into a miracle tomorrow, and we never know when it will be us who need that kindness." The ovation was deafening. People stood up, applauding, some crying. Helen descended from the stage and went directly to Rose, hugging her tightly. Victor watched, feeling that the circle was finally complete. 50 years of separation, pain, and absence, finally connected by a greater purpose. Mark would have been proud. His mother would have cried with joy. And Captain Robert Silver, wherever he was, would know that his simple actions had echoed through time in ways he could never have imagined. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and families celebrated, Victor asked Helen and Rose to accompany him to the parking lot. There was something he needed to give them. From the trunk of his car, he took out an old envelope. Inside was a photograph, yellowed with age. It showed 2 young soldiers, smiling despite the wartime backdrop. One of them was Mark. The other, Victor explained, his finger pointing, was Captain Robert Silver when he was young. Helen took the photo with trembling hands, looking at the grandfather she barely remembered. "He looks happy," she said softly. "They were friends," Victor explained. "I found this photo among Mark's belongings. I think your grandfather must have given it to him. And now it belongs to you. A symbol that even amidst war, pain, sacrifice, there can be connection, there can be love, there can be hope." Rose hugged, the photo to her chest, tears streaming freely. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for giving us not only a future, but for honoring our past." Victor smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't known in decades. "No," he said, "thank you, for reminding me that a life only has meaning when it is lived for something greater than ourselves." They stood there for a moment, three people united not by blood, but by something deeper, by gratitude, by respect, by love that transcended conventional definitions. And that night, when Victor finally returned to his mansion, it no longer seemed empty, because he had filled his emptiness not with things but with purpose, not with possessions but with connections. He went up to his room, looked out the window at the illuminated city below, and for the first time in 50 years since Mark's passing, he felt complete peace. Because he had paid his debt, he had honored the memory of his brother and his mother in the most meaningful way possible. He had changed lives, not with condescending charity, but with true recognition of the value and dignity of each person. And he had discovered that, in the end, the greatest wealth anyone can possess is not measured in money or power, but in the certainty that we matter, that we made a difference, that when we leave this world, we will leave behind better lives, fuller hearts, and a legacy of kindness that will continue to echo through generations. Helen would start university next semester, armed not only with her brilliant intelligence, but with a deep understanding of the value of sacrifice and kindness. Rose would continue to lead the foundation, helping dozens of other families, multiplying the kindness she had received. And Victor, well, Victor finally slept in peace. Not because he had solved all the world's problems, but because he had solved the only one that truly mattered. He had found connection, he had found purpose, he had found family. And sometimes that's all we need, a true connection, a greater purpose, a chosen family. The rest is just detail. The following years brought more transformations. Helen graduated from university with highest honors, became an engineer, and began working on infrastructure projects for underprivileged communities. Rose expanded the foundation, helping hundreds of veterans' families. And Victor, now 68, discovered that the last years of his life were the most fulfilling and satisfying he had ever lived. They gathered regularly for dinners, celebrated holidays together, and shared their lives in ways that went far beyond any obligation or debt. And always, in a place of honor in Rose's home, was that photograph. Mark and Robert, young smiling soldiers, unaware that their simple connections would create ripples that would cross half a century and change the destiny of future generations. Because that is true legacy. It is not what we leave in wills or legal documents. It is the love we share, the kindness we practice, the lives we touch. And those things never truly end. They just transform, multiply, continue to echo through time in ways we can never fully predict. And one dawn, many years after that first fateful dawn, Victor woke up and went to his kitchen. Not due to insomnia this time, but simply because he wanted a glass of water. And as he stood there, in the silent kitchen where everything had begun, he smiled. He smiled, thinking about how a single moment of attention, a single instant of truly seeing another person had changed everything. Because sometimes the difference between an empty life and a full life is just that, a moment of true connection, an instant of genuine empathy, a choice not to turn away when we see someone suffering, and Victor Alliance had made that choice, and it had made all the difference. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Victor, Helen, and Rose has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of kindness, sacrifice, and the transformative power of a simple human connection, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this. Your like motivates us to continue bringing narratives that celebrate the best of humanity. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever been helped by someone unexpected or had the opportunity to make a difference in someone else's life? We'd love to hear your story. We are here every day with new narratives that explore the complexities and beauties of life. Until the next story, and always remember, small gestures of kindness can create ripples that cross generations.